ninth season that we've had reproducing colonies. And at first we were a little bit discouraged but we got good mentoring. That I think is key. There you see our honey barn where we process the honey, and then you see the fields all around us, maple and cherry forest, that type of thing. And so that's the ideal bee country.
And one of the things that's interesting is every year's different, but the bees, I never realized they got so much pollen from the trees. We have a huge pollen flow, nectar flow in the spring. Or maple trees are very big, and they come back to the hive with pollen from the early trees, and that's interesting because I just never thought about it that way. I always thought about it as just flowers. So today we really want to talk to you, and if you give us a little bit of opportunity to imagine if a worker bee could talk to you and tell you about her world, because as we've gotten more and more into bees, we've learned so much more. And imagine they could tell you in their terms, about what we might be able to understand. And I know that we only have about 45 to actually 50 minutes to talk about this, but we're going to talk about 8 subjects that we're going to call them sort of beatitudes, right? And just like Jesus gave us what the kingdom of heaven is like, and it blew our minds, we are hoping that we're not comparing us to Jesus or anything like that, but we're hoping that this will blow your minds as well. And if there's 8 subjects, that's very little to talk about, actually, and there's so much we could say, but let's just call our bee Beatrice. And she's going to say, I'm curious that you would like to hear about my world. So the 8 subjects we're going to talk about here, just in a minute, are not going to be the following subjects. And we could spend hours on each one of these subjects about the honey and how that happens, and about beeswax, and how bees actually self-medicate. They know exactly which flowers to go to when they think that it would make them stronger or better. They'll go to the flowers that are probably the most medical for them, that are going to give them the best strength. They have importance to agriculture. And I'm just going to touch on some of these subjects very briefly. Something like 35% of the world's crop production is dependent on bee pollination or pollinators, which almost 90% of those pollinators are bees. There's also butterflies and moths and other types of insects and hummingbirds, etc. But it's something like 80% of the total crops are actually benefited by bees. And it's like the annual bee production or pollination accounts for at least somewhere between 1.9 to 3 billion gross money in the United States annually because of their pollination. So we can also talk about swarming and democratic decision-making. Bees, by the way, the queen is not in charge. Everybody thinks the queen is the boss, but she's just not. She's actually supported by the colony. And there's swarming and brood rearing and diseases and pesticides and pollinator, beekeeper agendas and global warming. But today we're going to talk about what we think is also dramatically important. First of all, the bees are the Swiss Army knife, or so to speak, have sensors and equipment that are very unique. They have a superhero sensor called electric image processors that most people had no idea how bees get things done. They're a navigator. They're collectors, they're pollinators. They have multiple roles in the world. They actually are educators. They teach each other how to do things. Bees learn. They start with different roles. When they first emerge, they are one thing, and they grow into different roles through the hive. These bees have to learn to leave a 1-inch hole or 2-centimeter hole and go out into the world and come back. They might fly 8 miles away. And they might go to different places and have to come back 8 miles to find a 2-inch hole. They have tunnel vision to track their landmarks. They have symbolic memory and logic, and they can learn. It's very amazing. So hopefully you'll catch up with this. And they have cognition. We're going to learn more about that in the future here. So number one, the bee would say, my first beatitude is that I'm extremely well equipped and I can perform multiple tasks with all my tools. If you look at, this is why I think I got asked to talk because of anatomy, but if you look at the bee, their antennas are not like what we think antennas do. Their antennas are their noses. They also have multiple sensory fibers on their antennas, but that's have 6,000 olfactory connections on the antenna. They can also touch with their antenna, but their whole body is covered with microscopic sensors and hairs, and their eyes are compound and faceted, so they see blurry until they get very close. Their vision's not like us. They don't see the same colors we see. They're very much attracted to the UV range. So red is not really seen well. They see blue and yellow very well. They prefer blue and yellow flowers. They have a very complicated brain, but it is only 1 million neurons. That's much less than a human brain. Human brains are 1 billion plus neurons. But they have also a horizontal sensor on the top of their head that helps them with horizontal location. Their wings are very unique, and their wings can be dislocated in the winter. I didn't even talk about temperature regulation, but temperature regulation within the hive is very, very important. So in the wintertime, a bee hive balls together. We don't do anything special to them. They're inside our hive. And they rotate and make a big ball. They disconnect their wings and make friction and keep the inside of the hive 94 degrees Celsius, or Fahrenheit, excuse me. So I don't know what that is in centigrade, but Celsius, but excuse me. Anyhow, they migrate, dislocate their wings and create the heat. In January, which is very cold in Pennsylvania, they start laying eggs, and eggs won't develop unless it's 94 degrees inside the hive. And so ultimately, after it gets about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they'll go outside and fly. But every time they come into the hive, they sort of change their wing status and go back. In the summer, they have to fan the hive to cool it down, to keep it from being too hot so the wax doesn't melt. And they also manage to be an air conditioner. So they have very strong flight muscles, and their legs, I don't have it here, but this is like there's a little pollen sac on each side. In some of our pictures, you'll see yellow kind of pollen on their legs. They brush the pollen into these little sacs, and they're like their saddlebags and keep them home. They have other things like a honey stomach, obviously, wax glands, stingers, etc. She has optimized design. But they also have special sensors that help them with behavior and memory. They can see polarized light. I didn't go into that, but we can't see polarized light, obviously, unless we have special glasses. But that allows them to discover the sun's angle, and that gives them an idea of the time of day and how they can go from the clock, or treat it like a clock or a calendar, and even helps them with speed of how fast they have to fly to get home. So how does a bee get home? So every day it's a navigational miracle, and I'm going to let Steve talk a little bit about this. But bees in the wild usually find a place in the trees, about 20 feet above the forest floor. And we have a certain number of bees that, or at times bees will swarm. They'll send out scout bees to find the perfect home. They'll go back to the bees and say, we're going to move half the hive with the queen to this new home. And half the hive will stay behind with queen cells that are forming, and also a certain amount of brood and nurse bees. So how do they find this? Well, I didn't really say this, by the way. That said, this slide says, one day I said, Steve, sometimes you do really dumb things with our bees. I think Steve took a little license with this. I might have said, why did you do that? But what he really was trying to say is he was doing a little experiment. Would you like to explain? Yeah.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I admit it, I do dumb things with bees, okay? And one day, I experimented with a hive, and while 5,000 bees were out foraging in the field, I rotated the hive 180 degrees. And and
They don't like that very much.
that confused them, yes. And that was the dumb thing I did with the bee that day. But anyway, in about 3 or 4 hours, I noticed the front of the hive, which was facing the bees had left, that it was now 180 degrees opposite, and the bees couldn't find the front door of the hive. And what I discovered was all the bees coated the side of the hive now that was the back entrance. They were
Trying to find the hole.
trying to find the hole. And so the bees were showing me that they could navigate plus or minus 2 feet. And they were very confused that the hole was gone, and they were saying to the bees inside, "Open up the hole. We know it's there." And so what is this precision navigation ability? That's what I learned with my dumb experiment.
And we're going to go in detail about that. But I just thought it was kind of mean and cruel to like kind of confuse the bees like that. Anyway, the bees also have an electrostatic sensors. This is our superhero kind of sensors, things that humans don't have much of, and this is just incredible. It adds to a third dimension or an optical kind of world. Even the olfactory, they have like almost 3 dimensions of smell. The smell is really, really exquisitely strong, and I touched on it briefly, but they can almost see 3 dimensions of smell. I guess not see, but sense. So, when we talk about superheroes, we talk about someone that has some special thing that gives them something like the Spider-Man has the web slinger, shooter, and spidey sense. But the honeybee has lots of superhero sensors. In humans, we can sometimes experience electricity, but it's not the same in a bee. The bees actually, when they fly, their wings with the chitin on their wings makes a positive current, or they are positively charged. So they go flying, and then they're in search of something like what would attract a positive charge? Something with a negative charge, right? And what do you think is God created to be negatively charged? So it's perfect. The bees will get close, and this negative charge, just like our static electricity, almost helps the pollen just immediately jump off the plant onto the bee. The bees then have this, like the hair and all the sensors. They push the pollen into their little pollen catchers, and also they can tell that they've discharged the flower. So a bee does see electrostatic image of the world, and if you actually dust flowers with a positive charge dust, you'll see something like this. The tips of the flowers, that helps to attract them, and also the stamen and close to the center of the flower where the pollen is. So a bee's image of this flower, is something like this. And this is obviously taken from this experiment. As it gets closer, it gets more attracted, kind of like a magnet. Just to show that one more time, it's kind of fun. And then, so their hair, again, we kind of touched on that, attracts the pollen. This is an example of bees, multiple bees in our property that are just attacking. These are just weeds along the road, and they are very happy with this flower. They tend to try to go in other places where others haven't gone, and they can tell when a charge has been decharged, or is that the right word? Discharge, yeah. And so that may make them more efficient at their seeking the flowers. So we're on number 3. Now the hive is a university with teachers and students, and the dedication to the hive is Beach's top priority. Her hive is where she's been intentionally trained and where she uses her sensors and brains to accomplish truly remarkable tasks. I know sometimes when I'm even reading this, I think, this is ridiculous. Bees don't really say this, right? But in my mind, as I learn more and more, bees do have this. Like, it's not just us trying to project humanism onto this bee. So here's a little bee that's just coming out of, they've chewed their way out of the bee bread, and it's a young adult that's kind of coming out of the brood, out of the chamber. And this little bee will become initially a janitor bee. The bee will actually chew up and empty out empty cells and clean up the old cells. And there's even so much that I haven't talked about the microbiome or the bacteria that's involved in the hive that might be important, that we all need, and we are now, and this is to sound out to Robert, we now know. So in other words, what we didn't know before, we now know that bees and microbiome are very important to bees, and they're cleaning out some of the old, and it's a certain amount of bacteria that must be in the bee bread that helps them grow healthy and prevent and fight diseases and digest their food. So they also then graduate from janitor bees to nursing bees, where they actually help make bee bread and put on top of the larva that's been laid. And here in the center, you see one little, like the little white spots that are in the center of the cell. Those are eggs that are just laid. They're laid within 3 days, and then they start to get capped. And the bees emerge after, as an adult in roughly 3 weeks. So then they go from there to learning how to be a scout bee, a guard bee. They guard the door first, and then when they're finally about 3 weeks old, then the older bees that you see out foraging are the oldest bees. Those bees are now foraging. But before we even get to that behavior, I skipped a step. After they're still quite young, they've been a nurse bee, they've been bee breeding, they've been doing that. Now they learn how to lay down comb and are making wax. So the wax glands secrete, they actually even partially digest them to soften the wax. And they have a festooning behavior, which is very, very complicated in the fact that these are master engineers. They have to learn to work together to make this design. So what's so incredible is this design. The festooning is where they cling to each other, and kind of it helps them with dimensions. A bee cell is the perfect hexagon, and the hexagon cell is perfect for making the strongest support structure that they can make to hold the most wax, or the most honey with the least amount of wax. So 1 kilogram of wax holds in their structure 50 pounds or 22 kilograms of honey. That's a lot. They are very, very efficient because of their design. And this is a design of a honeycomb inside something. It's a little bit not the traditional, but they create the space that they need for ventilation and also just for most efficiency, for temperature support. So if you see these perfect hexagon, they're slanted a little bit, so you can't take a bee frame and turn it upside down when it's not capped, because the honey is meant to stay, it's slightly tilted to stay in the right thing. So if you have a tree that had a feral hive in it and it fell, you want to be very careful that if you collect some of those wax frame, or a little bit of wax from the hive and put it in a frame, you maintain its orientation. That orientation is very important to having the honey stay good and for the bees. So after the bees come back and they bring their nectar and they fill up the cells, they actually dry it out. Once it reaches the proper concentration and this protects it, then they put the wax coating. And obviously, honey can last forever. It's been found in Egyptian tombs. This is just more example of them when they come back and how they're working. And you see to the right a really good example of the wings folded back on themselves. So one of the things that's important is that bees can communicate. And this is something called the waggle dance you might be familiar with.
By performing a unique dance. It informs hive mates where a newly discovered food source is located. Every cycle of this waggle dance roughly describes the shape of the figure 8. Let's rewind and look in more detail. The bee only waggles on a part of its route, the straight run, indicated here by the waved line. The secret lies in the direction of the straight run, or to be more precise, in the angle between the straight run and the perpendicular, which in this case is 90 degrees to the left. This tells the other bees that food is available 90 degrees to the left of the sun. If the angle is 60 degrees to the right, they'll be flying 60 degrees to the right of the sun.
So how does a bee that's in the hive, who's never been outside the hive, all of a sudden become a forager and now know exactly where to go? They know how to speak. Okay, now remember I said they don't hear, but they sense vibration very, very well. Again, that's a combination of their feet and their body and the hairs and everything about them. So it was interesting, if you go back to the waggle dance picture, and I won't play this long, the waggle dance picture, they're doing the dance on uncapped comb, so that the vibration is reverberated throughout the hive. It's not just on capped comb. They want to create the vibration to improve the communication. So a bee goes out and finds the perfect source of honey or nectar or pollen. They come back and they're so excited. They have to tell the hive about it because they know what's important to their social structure, and they communicate by how vigorous and how long how long they waggle depends on the distance, but the direction of their waggle is directed towards the sun. So, gives them the direction towards the sun. So, actually they can do other complex tasks, and this is a bumblebee, but honeybees can do similar things. And this is just, you can't believe it, right? When you think they're just little insects.
So can they use tools and teach each other about all kinds of things? Well, this is an experiment that was done by bee scientists. And they made blue circles, and in the middle
As
of
if
the
they're
blue
flowers.
circle is a nectar drop, and in the nectar drop there, of course, is carbohydrate the bee wants to get. But it's under a glass sliver, and so they have to pull the string to remove the nectar from the dot in the center. And the bee learns that by trial and error, but then once it's learned, the bee knows how to do it. And this is a little movie to show it. So the bee pulls the string, gets the flower-like object out, and of course gets the reward of the treat. Okay, but not only does it learn how to use the tool, but it learns how to tell the other bees about this thing. And that's what's the amazing thing, and you read about it in the bee literature. But string pulling, and that's just the way bees are. They love to talk to each other and show their abilities.
So they eventually graduate into foraging bees, and they leave their 1-inch hole and go out. And now they've never been out before, so there is some thought that they sort of maybe test the waters a little, don't go too far at the beginning, we don't really know. But they have to kind of convert from being inside to outside. They do learn by observation. This is a video that we took at our own house. So you do see some of the pollen sacs coming back. As they go indoors, they do retract their wings a little bit, and they're all trying to get in. They have to make room. There's a guard bee on the inside that makes sure they're not like a competing hive that would come in. They have their own sensors that they smell their own queen as well, so when they get close, they're trying to get to just their hive. We have our hives close. They don't go to alternative hives if they can help it, unless they're trying to rob them if they're in dire situations there. So their chief now that they've graduated from the indoor, they're going out to be a forager. And that's the most risky job, because that's where they lose most of the bees. That's where bees get killed one way or the other. And but ultimately they have to find their way home. And so they become expert at terrain recognition. This is the part that I'm going to turn over to Steve as well. It's kind of complicated. It's they can go and fly through a tunnel or a kaleidoscope, and it's very three-dimensional. They basically recognize landmarks. They recognize current location. People can. There have been bees that have been dropped off to different locations in a blind box, and they find their way back to their home. And that's where it's an example of having a memory of certain locations that to recognize their maybe vegetation or things that they can help.
have you noticed that Kelly has kind of an anatomy and physiology emphasis, and I have a kind of a electric field and geophysical and geotechnical interest in bees. But the bees have tunnel vision, and that's the thing that probably makes it most different than our world. But you can see that they fly optically. They can see the sun, but they can navigate to within plus or minus 2 feet after foraging for hours. Come back to the hive, and on the left there you see the
Polarized light.
Polarized light in the above the tunnel. That's basically the way to think about it. The bee sees the near field, what's close to them, because of the hairs on their body, the electrostatic sense that's overlain the optical, and you're looking down into a tunnel. Okay, one end of the tunnel, the back end of the tunnel, is what? That's the 2 centimeter diameter hole back there. And then, but what's at the other end? That's a horizon that the bee only sees indistinctly. And then above the tunnel, you can see the direction of the light because of the polarization of the light. The light doesn't have to be naturally on a clear day. It can be a dark day. And they can even see in cloudy weather the direction. And so they fly the tunnel, and the thought is that they memorize the near field, and they see the objects in the near field, and so that provides a rolling memory that they kind of do. But that's amazing.
Yeah, and it gets even better. They not only do they have language and communication and navigation skills, but they can comprehend symbols. They can add and subtract. They can recognize faces. And they can, if you could modify them a car that they could drive, if you put a brake and a steering wheel, somehow they could even be taught how to drive. So here's a Y maze that people use to train bees. And I think I'll let Steve explain this a little bit. The bees come in through this, and then they have to make a decision. And they ask them to make a decision, and then they get a reward. And this helps them do a variety of experiments, correct, Steve? So
you can teach subtraction and addition. The initial portal that they come through is where the type of decision making is asked for, and the bee recognizes, oh, I'm going to do some addition, okay, or subtraction, and the colors match, and multiplicity of images helps make a decision. But yellow is subtraction, blue is addition, let's say, and then they go into the Y maze and they say, oh, 3, I need to do a subtraction, so 3 minus 1 is 2. And so they go to the right in the Y maze and they get the treat. And so it's
and these are reproducible kind of experiments.
Reproducible type of things, and so it's not accidental.
They probably recognize more symbols. This is Dave. He's one of the gentlemen that work with us on our property, and he was always getting stung by the bees. Not always, but several times. A lot of the area in the ground is near the hives, and then, well, I didn't really believe this, but initially, but Steve looks at the bees very individual as well, and he says to Dave, well, why don't we plant some flowering trees near the hives? So they planted a couple crabapple trees, and the bees were very happy. So now Dave is not afraid of the bees, and the bees aren't afraid of Dave. Actually, this is a swarm, and the swarms are not very defensive when they're swarming because they don't have a honey colony, or they don't have much honey to protect. So, but it is true that bees do start to recognize people and faces, and they recognize their keepers. And they have done experiments that show that they can differentiate faces. And over time, they recognize images in different faces, and they become familiar with people that work with them. And believe it or not, there's even been studies that show that bees can differentiate between abstract art and Monet and different types of artwork. And they had different pairs here, and they made these decision trees the same way in the Y maze. And they would pick Picasso versus Monet every time. They could understand the differences. So getting back, the bees have amazing navigational skills. They have intentionality. They know what they want to do. They have memory. They know where they begin. They have landmarks. They know how to travel. They know the direction, distance, the speed, the time. They can interpret signs. So if there is a stop sign, they would probably know how to do that if they had such a thing, so to speak. They could do turns and shortcuts and obstacle avoidance, and they can recognize destinations. They know how to load their cargo and return to the beginning point. So what do you think a bee would drive? A BMW. This is pretty corny. I have another one. And this bee likes a Humvee here. So finally, we're getting close to the end, but the cognition is difficult to probably measure, but obviously we know they speak communication. They're very smart. So what is cognition? It's a process of acquiring knowledge. We know they learn. They understand thought, experience, and the senses. So is it displayed in their mind? Well, we can study the brain. There's perception and memory. Bees actually sleep at night. There's some discussion about them dreaming. It's interesting. They can make computation and problem solve and decision making. They can formulate language. They can use tools. So this is sort of all the definition of different categories that are necessary to have self-awareness and metacognition. So the Y mazes are used to train bees. And we're going to end up here where, everything that these bees do is coordinated. It's intelligent design. The brain of the size of a bee is the size of a sesame seed. And, you think even before Charles Darwin, most people didn't appreciate anything small is just like innate and is not significant. Everybody thinks an ant doesn't have any kind of brain or is completely senseless, but this isn't true. Instead, this behavior is learned and neuroplastic and marvelous, and the bees think like we think in many ways. There's a sesame seed. So a lot of study has been done on bees, and the blue thing there is the central organ. That's that's where most of the memories are thought to be stored. There's a variety of different types of lobes of the brain that's important. But I love this. This is a secular journal, but it says the unexpected brilliance of the world's tiniest brains. Everybody's now realizing that what we now know is significant, and that these tiny brains can do things through use of microscopic electrodes, sharp scans, ultra sharp scans. We realize that creatures can have anxiety. There's a sense that they can feel. So it's extraordinary power within only less than 1 million neurons. And so if you think about that, humans have 100 billion neurons. That's 100,000 times more power than what the bees have. So just in follow-up, the bees are a Swiss Army knife of equipment and sensors. Superhero sensors such as the electronic imaging processor. They can navigate and collect and pollinate. They have good occupation. They are educators and they're students. They know how to navigate through to find their 1-inch portal between the two worlds, and they have tunnel vision to track landmarks. They know how to make logical decisions, especially symbolically, and using symbols, I should say, and they have cognition. So when we go back to Charles Darwin being a beekeeper, the beekeepers or the Vikers of St. Mary's Church really had problems with the bee world. They understood hives and their education and their intelligence, and they questioned Darwin on this, and he struggled with this. It didn't fit his theory very well. And he actually, I know that Steve has said that he deferred publication or publishing his theory for 10 years because of this conundrum. I mean, his concern. But ultimately, he was going to get scooped, and so he just put out The Origin of Species anyway because he knew he couldn't explain everything. So his dilemma was that, you know, he could watch and see that the bees had a communication, and that he believed that natural selection ought to be hardwired as a simple instinct. But remember, every bee has one queen, every hive, has one queen, and their own genetic DNA is passed that way. I mean, there is a little bit to the drones, but the drones are haploid. They basically have no father. They are made up of just their mother's DNA. And so ultimately, the beekeepers knew that there is advanced cognition, and he had a hard time understanding how to do with this problem. And ultimately, this led to some behavioral theories and psychology, and it kind of poisoned the social science of the 20th century. But incredibly, creationists actually predicted the features of the honeybee design and discovered in the different discoveries of the honeybee. I'll leave this to you. So.
Why did Job have a brain composed of 100,000 times the size of a bee brain? Is that a good way to say it? Anyway, he really had some bad things happen to him, and he started to think about that, and a whole bunch of tormentors came by, and they claimed that Job had an integrity problem with God. You know the Job story. And they debated God's purpose. And Job defended himself in his integrity, and in the process, he implied that God had some responsibility for this whole thing, and that he was not being explained to God. Then what happens is unexpectedly God shows up in the 38th chapter of Job. You know that story. And God starts asking the right questions. And then what happens? After realizing that Job has metacognition problem, he doesn't know what's outside of his box, his domain, God shows up and responds. And surely, Job says, "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know." Job chapter 42. And but Job was really, really tested and found the right answer. He realized that he didn't have the cognition, or all the answers to cognition. And of course, you know the rest of the book of Job is about Job being afflicted in his actions, and that Satan and that angels were involved. And when God asked, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" Job was speechless. And so God obviously was doing more than Job could understand. And then, look, you want to talk about the...
Well, basically, it's like, what do you do with the intelligence of the bees? And again, we know that Darwin had a problem with that, but surely, you know, it just comes back, nobody else was there at creation, you know. So I think it's really important to go to the Word and, you know, focus on the Word, which is the truth. And just like in Psalms, how sweet are your words to the taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. And you can also say that in Proverbs it even references that eat honey because it's good, and the honeycomb is sweet to your palate, and so shall knowledge and wisdom be to your soul. So there's, they don't have that many references to the bees in the Bible, but it doesn't take much to observe them and recognize how amazing God's work is. So it's just been a blessing to us to take care of bees and kind of inadvertently fall into their amazing world and God's creation. Thank you.
The next break, when we have a break, over in the cafeteria here, the cafe, let's say, we've put some Austin Farm honey out, and you're welcome to partake in it. A good way to sample honey is with a Ritz cracker, because you know the Ritz cracker taste, and then it's going to be overlaid by the honey taste. So you're welcome to do that.
There's two different kinds.
Two different kinds out of the same hive. We can actually have three different kinds, but we brought two different kinds of honey. The spring honey, which is usually light colored and has a kind of a fruity twang, and then that is available usually end of June. And then we have the fall honey that's available usually by the end of September, and we usually harvest in November. But it's a very dark color. Out of the same hive, we have different light and dark.
It just depends on what the flowers and the nectar source is.
Yeah, the nectar source. So knotweed honey is, we think, is what we're getting there. And so we see all these different flavors of honey. So, and you're welcome to talk to us. We have all kinds of stories about bee virologists who are friendly with us now. And so we were able to interact with the bee literature and the bee scientists. So you're welcome to talk to us after, and we'll have a question session this later in the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Som fembarnsfar så likte jeg det der greia at det første de der biene lærte seg, det var å rydde. Det la jeg merke til. Der har vi noe å ta etter, vi mennesker. Og så kan man jo lure på da, hva kom først, sant? Denne bien sin spenning i kroppen, eller denne blomsten sin, sånn at den nektaren skulle klare å feste seg og så videre, eller denne pollenet skulle feste seg. Og så skjønner vi jo at det må være der samtidig for at dette skal virke. Lang tid løser ikke det problemet, utvikling fungerer ikke. Det må være sånn som Gud har sagt. Det måtte være der samtidig for kort tid siden. Flott! Nå det pause, og så det en liten endring i programmet. Det står at Frank Karlsen skal ha nå klokka 12, men det blir Kjell Skartveit som vil være med oss da. Og så kommer Frank Karlsen til å være rett etter middag klokka 2:30. Så da, ja, og så det med matbilletter som Iver Olav her, bare reis deg Iver Olav. Han vil gjerne gi matbilletter til dere som vil ha middag, og det siste sjansen nå, så snakk med han ute i hallen her etterpå. Så det kjempebra. Og ta kontakt med våre gjester, de setter de veldig pris på, og prat med de, og de har Austin har med seg sin sønn her med oss, og han jobber i Meta, så hvis du irritert eller glad i Facebook, så kan du ta en liten prat med han. Ok, fint. Da det pause frem til klokka 12.